Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on a really significant moment in modern history.
We are indeed. We're looking at the Six-Day War, June 1967.
Absolutely pivotal. I mean, this conflict basically redrew the map of the Middle East almost overnight, didn't it?
It really did. And it established Israel as, well, a dominant regional power. Plus, it kicked off the long-term military governance of the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights, stuff we're still dealing with today.
Exactly. So understanding 67 is pretty crucial for understanding, well, almost everything that's happened since in the region.
For sure. In the story most people know, the kind of accepted narrative that went global is that Israel was facing, imminent annihilation, that it was this small state completely cornered.
Right, surrounded by Arab armies making these really aggressive threats. You hear about the broadcasts on Voice of the Arabs radio and so on.
Exactly that narrative. And it goes that facing this existential threat, Israel had no choice but to launch a preemptive strike.
Starting with that famous, really devastating air raid on the Egyptian Air Force, Monday, June 5th, 1967. That's the story, right? Heroic self-defense?
That is the celebrated version. But the sources we're digging into today, they offer let's say, a very challenging counter-argument.
Okay, so we're going beyond the official lines.
We are. We're looking at intelligence reports, internal political documents, and frankly, some astonishing admissions from Israeli military leaders themselves.
Admissions? What kind?
Admissions that suggest the war wasn't really about survival, about fending off annihilation, but that it might have been, well, a calculated, perhaps even predetermined war of conquest.
Wow. Okay, that's a very different picture. So our mission today is to explore that evidence.
That's the plan, to really unpack this alternative view based on these sources.
All right, let's start with the buildup, because things definitely look scary in May 1967. You had Egyptian President Nasser making some big moves.
Oh, absolutely. The tension was already high. Palestinian guerrilla activity had increased. There were air battles between Israel and Syria. Right. But then Nasser, he made a series of rapid-fire escalations. It really dialed up the fear factor.
Okay, like what?
Well, May 16th, he asks the UN to pull its peacekeepers out of the Sinai.
Okay, that's a big step.
Huge. Then, May 23rd, the massive one. Closing the Straits of Tiran and the Gulf of Aqaba to Israeli ships.
Casus belli for Israel, potentially?
Seen that way by many, yes. And then just a week later, May 30th, Egypt and Jordan sign a mutual defense pact. So Jordan's now in the mix, too.
You can see how that would create panic.
Oh, absolutely. Genuine terror, both in Israel and for Jewish communities around the world. Our sources talk about, Israelis digging graves, preparing for mass casualties.
And didn't the Prime Minister, Eshkol, say something really stark?
He did. Levi Eshkol, addressing the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, on June 12th, actually said the very existence of the state of Israel hung upon a thread. That was the feeling, the public emotion.
But hang on. If Nasser really wanted to invade and annihilate Israel, as people were led to believe, his strategy seems a bit off, doesn't it?
You mean?
Well, giving all that warning. Requesting UN troops leave, closing the straits, signing pacts, it telegraphs intent. Why not just attack with surprise, if annihilation was the goal?
That's exactly the point our sources really hammer home. It's a kind of cognitive dissonance, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the alternative view argues, look, Nasser wasn't necessarily aiming for a war of destruction. He was acting out of pride. Partly he'd been shamed before for, hiding behind the UN.
Okay.
And this was maybe a desperate political gamble, a high-stakes one.
A gamble aimed at what then? Not war.
Aimed, according to this analysis, at forcing the United States to step in.
Based on commitments Eisenhower made after Suez in '56.
Precisely. The idea was Nasser hoped the U.S. would feel obligated to intervene, act as a mediator, convene some kind of peace conference.
So he could save face, maybe get the straits reopened without a full-blown conflict.
That's the argument. The rhetoric was sky high, yes, but the expectation, or perhaps the hope, was for international intervention, not necessarily an all-out Egyptian offensive.
Interesting. Does anything else support that?
Well, there's the fact that Nasser apparently kept a back channel open with Moshe Sharett, a former Israeli PM known for seeking peace.
Really? Even during that high tension?
Apparently so. It complicates that simple picture of a leader just blindly marching towards war, doesn't it?
It definitely does. Okay, so that reframing of Nasser's intent leads us nicely into the next section. The military and intelligence picture.
Right, because this is where the sources really try to dismantle that annihilation myth. The claim is stark. Intelligence agencies, before the war even started, didn't believe Israel was in real danger.
Seriously? despite the Arab troop buildup and the rhetoric?
Curiously, I mean, look at the actual forces. The Israeli military, built from the Haganah, Palmach, Irgun, those pre-state groups, was disciplined, well-equipped, had loads of WWII combat experience.
Okay, and the Arab armies.
Described in the sources as, frankly, a hodgepodge, often poorly coordinated, logistics issues, internal politics, just generally seen as no match for the IDF.
And this wasn't hindsight. This was the view before June 5th.
Absolutely. This was the intelligence consensus at the time. We're talking U.S. and British intelligence.
And what were they saying specifically?
Well, U.S. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara apparently stated quite clearly the only question wasn't if Israel would win, but how long it would take them.
Wow.
And CIA Director Richard Helms, even more blunt. He reportedly said if Israel attacked first, short war. But even if they didn't, there was no question about who would win. The outcome was seen as a foregone conclusion by the big players.
So a massive disconnect between the public fear and the intelligence assessment.
Huge disconnect. The panic was real for ordinary people, absolutely. But the intel community saw the military reality very differently.
But the sources mentioned something even more, well, explosive than the intel consensus. What about Israeli military leaders themselves? What did they say?
Ah, yes. This is where the official story really starts to unravel, according to these documents. We have direct quotes, often from years later, mind you, but from the very top brass, the architects of the victory.
Okay, like who? Give us an example.
Yitzhak Rabin, chief of staff at the time, later prime minister, of course. He's quoted as saying, "I do not believe that Nasser wanted war. The 2 divisions which he sent into Sinai would not have been enough to unleash an offensive."
Not enough. From the chief of staff.
That's the quote presented. And then there's General Matetyahu Peld, chief of logistical command. Even stronger.
What did he say?
He stated flatly, Israel was never in real danger, and there was no evidence that Egypt had any intention of attacking Israel. He even apparently called the idea that Egypt was an existential threat an insult to the Israeli army's intelligence.
An insult. That's strong language.
Very. And General Ezer Weizmann, chief of operations, later president, he dismissed the whole justification. There was never any danger of annihilation. This hypothesis has never been considered in any serious meeting.
Never even considered. So the public narrative was completely detached from the internal military assessment.
According to these specific quotes, yes. And maybe the most direct admission comes from Menachem Begin. He was in the National Unity Government formed just before the war, later became prime minister himself.
What did Begin say?
He's quoted as saying, quite simply, "We must be honest with ourselves. We decided to attack him."
We decided to attack him. That shifts everything, doesn't it? From preemption out of necessity to a chosen action.
Precisely. It reframes June 5th entirely, suggesting it wasn't forced upon them, but was a strategic choice.
Okay, so if the existential threat was, according to these sources in quotes, fabricated or at least massively exaggerated, what was the real objective then? Why attack?
The sources point towards one underlying goal, the pursuit of Greater Israel, Eretz Yisrael. Meaning incorporating the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria, what we now call the West Bank, and crucially, Jerusalem.
So ideological religious drivers.
Partly, yes, but also very practical political and resource objectives. Land, water control. These were major factors according to this analysis. It was framed as a war of conquest.
And if conquest was the goal, did Israel actively try to provoke a conflict to justify it?
The sources argue yes. They detail efforts to deliberately escalate tensions, especially after Egypt and Syria signed that defense pact back in November '66.
Is there a specific example of this provocation? Something concrete?
The most cited one, and it's pretty damning if accurate, concerns the Syrian border skirmishes.
Yep.
Moshe Dayan, who became defense minister right before the war, reportedly admitted years later in 1976.
Admitted what?
That they would intentionally send tractors into disputed, demilitarized zones near the Syrian border to plow land.
Why?
The explicit goal, according to Dayan's reported admission, was to keep pushing the tractors forward until the Syrians finally shot at them.
To create an incident. A Casus belli.
Exactly, to manufacture the justification needed for a military response, literally engineering the conflict they seemingly wanted.
That's quite an admission.
It is, and this whole atmosphere, the manufactured fear, the engineered incidents, it all played into internal Israeli politics too.
How so?
Well, Prime Minister Eshkol and even Chief of Staff Rabin, they initially seemed to favor a more limited operation, maybe not the full-scale offensive, but they came under intense pressure.
From who? Hardliners.
Yes. They were painted as weak, indecisive, hesitant in the face of this supposed existential threat.
And that pressure worked.
It led to Eshkol giving up the defense minister portfolio. And who did he give it to?
Moshe Dayan.
Moshe Dayan, the hardliner. And once Dayan was in charge of defense, he became the architect of the sweeping territorial conquests. Any chance of that diplomatic route the peace conference Nasser might have hoped for was basically gone.
So the public fear wasn't just organic panic, it was amplified and used politically.
That's the core argument here. It was a tool, a rationalization for a pre-existing strategic goal.
Is there anyone from inside the government at the time who confirms this kind of thinking?
There's a quote from Mordecai Bentov, who was a minister in that national unity government. It's pretty explicit.
What did he say?
He's quoted as stating, "The entire story of the danger of extermination was invented in every detail and exaggerated a posteriori to justify the annexation of new Arab territory."
Invented in every detail and exaggerated. That's incredibly blunt. A direct accusation of propaganda to justify expansionism.
It is. It paints a picture of calculated deception aimed at achieving territorial goals.
Okay, so if the argument is that this was a planned war of conquest built on manufactured pretexts, how far would they go to control the narrative in the situation?
Well, the sources take us to a very controversial and dark event just 3 days into the war. The attack on an American naval vessel.
You mean the USS Liberty?
Exactly, the USS Liberty incident on June 8th.
Tell us about that. What do the sources claim happened?
They claim, and look, this is still hotly debated, we need to stress that, but the sources we reviewed argue it was a deliberate Israeli attack on a clearly marked U.S. Navy intelligence ship.
And the cost?
Horrific.
Yeah.
34 American sailors killed, 174 wounded. The ship was severely damaged but didn't sink.
And the Liberty's job was signals intelligence, right? Listening in.
Precisely. It was packed with antennas, positioned off the coast of Egypt near El Arish, capable of monitoring communications.
So why would Israel, an ally, attack it? What do the sources suggest?
2 main reasons are put forward. First, secrecy about military operations. Israel was wrapping up in the Sinai, consolidating the West Bank, but crucially preparing to attack Syria and seize the Golan Heights.
An action the U.S. under President Johnson hadn't agreed to.
Reportedly not. Johnson feared it could provoke Soviet intervention. So the argument goes Israel wanted zero U.S. eavesdropping on those unauthorized plans and movements.
Okay, that's one reason. What's the second?
Even darker. The sources allege there was concern the Liberty might intercept evidence of war crimes happening on the ground.
War crimes? Like what?
Specifically, allegations documented in the source material about the execution of hundreds of captured Egyptian soldiers near El Arish. Some reports even mention prisoners being forced to dig their own graves. Israel vehemently denies these claims, but the sources suggest fear of interception was a motive.
So the attack itself, was it presented as a mistake? Fog of war.
That became the official line eventually, yes. Friendly fire, mistaken identity in the heat of battle. But the sources argue the attack itself suggests intent.
How so?
It wasn't brief. It was sustained, lasting about 2 hours. It involved multiple waves of jet fighters strafing, then torpedo boats. Crucially, reports claim Israeli forces machine-gun life rafts that were launched. Napalm was used.
Machine-gunning life rafts.
That's what survivors in these sources allege. The picture painted is an attempt to sink the ship entirely, leave no survivors, and potentially blame Egypt for the attack.
But it didn't sink, and there were survivors. What about the cover-up afterwards?
The sources describe a significant effort. Most notably, Defense Secretary McNamara learned that U.S. fighter jets had been scrambled from the USS Saratoga to defend the Liberty, and he ordered them recalled, stopped the rescue attempt.
Why would he do that?
The sources suggest immense political pressure. The Johnson administration ultimately accepted the mistake explanation, despite later contradictions from figures like Admiral Thomas Moore, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs and called it a deliberate attack.
Pressure from where?
The sources point to the influence of the Israeli lobby and, according to descriptions cited, threats of political repercussions, smearing opponents, withholding campaign funds if the administration pushed too hard.
And what makes the mistake explanation difficult to sustain today, according to these sources?
The release, in more recent years, of audio recordings tapes of Israeli pilots and controllers communicating during the attack.
And what do they show?
They reportedly show Israeli personnel clearly identifying the ship as American, flying the American flag while the attack was ongoing.
So they knew it was American and continued the attack.
That's the implication drawn from those tapes in the source material. It makes the mistaken identity claim very hard to square with the available evidence presented.
It really paints a picture from the initial justification for war through the military actions to this incident.
It does. It suggests a pattern, according to this analysis, a manufactured threat leading to a planned war, and a willingness to go to extreme lengths, even attacking an ally, to maintain secrecy and control the narrative.
So let's try to synthesize this. After digging into these sources, what's the main takeaway for someone trying to understand the Six-Day War?
I think it fundamentally challenges you to question the dominant narrative. You have to reconcile that image of a purely righteous or compelling cause, as Abba Oben famously put it,
Right.
with this counter-narrative backed by intelligence assessments, military admissions, and specific incidents, suggesting it was actually a planned war of conquest, a war involving calculated provocation and, well, significant political manipulation.
And the relevance today is unavoidable, isn't it?
Completely. The sources draw a direct line from the outcomes of 1967, the occupation, the situation in Gaza, the annexation of the Golan, to the conflicts and challenges we see right now. They argue it all stems from a war begun, perhaps, under fundamentally false pretenses.
Not imminent self-defense, but something else.
Something else entirely, according to this perspective.
So a final thought for our listeners to consider based on all this.
Maybe this. If a conflict so widely celebrated as a war of necessity, of sheer survival, might actually have been, according to these sources, an engineered war of conquest, what does that suggest about how we should evaluate claims of existential threat in conflicts happening right now?
It forces a critical lens, doesn't it?
It really does. Are we looking at genuine fact-based intelligence about imminent danger? Or are we sometimes presented with a narrative, perhaps fueled by fear, that's designed to justify a different underlying strategic objective? That's the uncomfortable question these sources leave us with.
A crucial question indeed. Thank you for